Hello, welcome to RememberBarney5.org. Last week at the end, I said we'd be doing episode 28 this week. I should have said episode 27. Week 27's episode title is Howard the Comedian. Andy and Gooder and Floyd are talking about how funny Howard was at the lodge meeting last night. He was master of ceremonies. And Floyd tells Andy one of Howard's jokes because Andy had missed that particular one. And then Howard comes in and they congratulate him. And Floyd tells him there's talk that the Elks Club wants him to come and perform there too. And Howard says, well, I still do have my job as full-time county clerk, but if something interesting comes along, who knows? And that night the Taylor family is watching Colonel Tin's Talent Time on TV, and Andy says Howard is funnier than the comedian who's on the show. And Ultie and Andy say that Howard should audition for the show. And when Howard hears this idea, he says being on statewide TV is a little different than just being at the lodge meeting. He says he needs something different, a new angle on how to tell jokes. And Ultie says, why don't you personalize the jokes to be about Mayberry folks? And Howard says, good idea. So Howard auditions for the show and he gets accepted. And Andy takes Howard down to the studio in Raleigh for the live broadcast of the show while Aunt Bee and Opie and Clara and Goober and Floyd watch from the Taylor home. But this act is all about making fun of Mayberry. How small it is, how laid back Andy is at his job, the way Goober drives, and how Floyd repeats gossip. And then he tells jokes about Aunt Bee's and Clara's ancestors. Ultie at home thinks it's funny, and so does Andy at the studio, but no one else from Mayberry does. They're all offended. They think that Howard is getting a laugh at their expense. So when he gets back to town and says he's been asked back to the show for a second time, Floyd and Goober are mad at him rather than congratulating him. And Andy says, well, I can't believe this. And he tells Howard, don't let them bother you. Let's go get a cup of coffee at my house. And when they get there, Ultie is nice to Howard, but Aunt Bee and Clara are mad at him too, just like Gooder and Floyd were. And later in the courthouse, Andy tries to get Gooder to forgive Howard. He says Howard didn't mean anything by what he said about your driving, Gooder, but Gooder says no. But then a stranger comes in the courthouse, and he says he just wanted to meet the sheriff and the mechanic that he heard about on TV last night. He thought it was great. And folks have been calling Aunt Bee all day to congratulate her for being mentioned on the show. Same thing with Clara. Plus, Clara got an invitation to be a speaker at some historical society. And the same thing happens to Floyd. A stranger comes to town, and he asks him what it feels like to be famous. So they're all happy now about how famous they are. But before Howard finds out about this change in their attitude, he gets all four of them together so he can apologize to them for making fun of them and to say that he's going to cancel his second appearance on Colonel Tin's Talent Time. But when they all hear this, they say no, you can't break your word to Colonel Tin. Plus, they wanted to use their names again, and they all even give Howard jokes about themselves that they say Howard can use. And that night, Opie asked his dad why they were all mad at Howard, but then changed their minds, and Andy says, it has to do with ego and pride. But his pa can't explain very well what those terms mean, or how they explain the changes of attitude that Floyd and Gooder and Clara and Aunt Bee had, so Andy just tells Ultie to get back to his homework. We'll see you next week for episode 28.